When a group of officers arrives to evict an elderly black woman from her penthouse, they assume she's just another helpless tenant. They couldn't be more wrong. What starts as a routine eviction quickly unravels into one of the biggest scandals the city has ever seen. Corrupt judges, illegal evictions, and a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of government. This case will shake the system to its core. But the real question is, who is truly in control? This is a battle for justice, and not everyone will make it out unscathed. Subscribe now to see how the truth unfolds. The morning was crisp, the sun casting golden hues over the city skyline. It was supposed to be a quiet day for Evelyn Banks, a 67-year-old retired judge enjoying her coffee in the penthouse of her luxury apartment. She had earned every square inch of it. Decades of battling injustice in the courtroom had made her a formidable name in legal circles. Then came the knock. It wasn't the polite, neighborly kind. It was the sharp, authoritative pound of a fist. She knew that sound well. Law enforcement. Evelyn set down her cup and walked toward the door, unhurried. Through the peephole, she saw four uniformed officers, their expressions unreadable behind their mirrored sunglasses. They were all white. One of them, a tall man with a rigid stance, shifted impatiently. Sergeant Daniels. She recognized him from a previous case, one that had uncovered racial profiling in his precinct. She unlocked the door, her face calm. Yes. Daniels barely waited before stepping forward. You need to vacate the premises immediately. Evelyn arched an eyebrow. Excuse me? This apartment is no longer yours. We have a court order for your eviction. He held up a document, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she tilted her head. That's interesting. Daniels narrowed his eyes. Excuse me? I say it's interesting because I own this entire building. Evelyn reached into a nearby drawer and pulled out a thick, bound document, the official deed to the property. She held it up, letting the morning light reflect off the embossed seal. The officers exchanged glances. One of them, a younger man with a nervous twitch, hesitated. Daniels, however, sneered. Nice trick, ma'am. But this, he shook the eviction notice, is from the court. That means you have to leave. Evelyn studied him for a moment before speaking. That's where you're mistaken, Sergeant. Because I am the court. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. What do you mean? Evelyn smiled. You've just presented me with an eviction order from a judge. She stepped forward, voice unwavering. But what you failed to realize is that I am the chief oversight official for this district's judicial board, which means I have the authority to overturn any ruling that violates due process. Daniel's face twitched. That's not possible. It's more than possible, another voice chimed in. A figure stepped out from the hallway. Nathan Carter, a renowned civil rights attorney. He adjusted his glasses, holding a folder filled with legal documents. I suggest you take a look at this, Sergeant. That court order you're holding. He tapped the folder. It's a forgery. Silence. The nervous officer took a step back. Daniels clenched his jaw. This isn't official, no, Carter interrupted. It's an illegal attempt to seize property under false pretenses. And we have proof. Evelyn folded her arms. Now, Sergeant, why don't you tell me who gave you this fraudulent order? Daniels remained silent, but his hands twitched. The other officers were shifting now, uncertain. Then came the second knock. Not at the door, but at the windows. Evelyn's penthouse had floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and behind them, several agents in dark suits stood watching. Nathan smirked. Ah, right on time. Daniels turned as a new voice filled the room. FBI, step away from a lady. Evelyn sighed, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips. I told you, Sergeant. The law works both ways. Daniels finally broke. What the hell is going on? The lead FBI agent held up a badge. We've been investigating illegal evictions targeting black homeowners and tenants. And guess what, Daniels? You're at the top of our list. Evelyn crossed her arms. Shall we continue this discussion in court? Daniels opened his mouth, then shut it. Because, for the first time, he realized he wasn't in control anymore. Sergeant Daniels stood frozen, his hand still clutching the forged eviction notice. The weight of the FBI agent's words seemed to press down on him, draining the color from his face. His fellow officers looked at each other, shifting uneasily. Evelyn Banks remained where she was, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. She had seen men like Daniels before, men who believed the law was a weapon meant only for those in power, not for those they deemed unworthy. Nathan Carter stepped forward, flipping open his folder. "Sergeant, let me save you the trouble of thinking up another excuse. The document you're holding was signed by Judge Leonard Whitaker, a man with a long history of issuing questionable rulings against black homeowners." He held up another paper. "Except there's a problem." The FBI agent stepped closer, taking the eviction order from Daniel's hand and holding it up to the light. His lips curled in satisfaction. Ink still fresh. This wasn't issued by any courthouse. This was printed less than an hour ago. Daniel's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you're talking about." Evelyn let out a small chuckle. "Of course you don't. Because you're used to people not questioning your authority. You think if you flash a badge and raise your voice, people will just comply." She stepped forward, her piercing gaze locking onto him. "But tell me, Sergeant, how does it feel knowing that today you're the one being investigated?" The younger officer behind Daniels finally cracked. His voice was low, nervous. "Daniels, they're right. This order, it isn't real, is it?" Daniels whipped around, eyes flaring with warning. "Shut up, Morris." Nathan smirked. "That's the first honest thing anyone in your unit has said today." Before Daniels could respond, the FBI agent's radio crackled. "Command to Agent Foster, Judge Whitaker is in custody. We found additional forged eviction orders at his home. We also have a lead on the payments made to officers involved." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Well, I suppose that answers our question." Daniel's hands curled into fists. "This is a setup." Evelyn shook her head. "No, Sergeant. This is justice catching up to you." The FBI agent, Foster, nodded at his men. "Take them in." Daniels snapped, grabbing for his gun. "You can't." Before he could finish his sentence, 3 agents had him pinned against the wall, disarming him in seconds. His fellow officers barely moved. The young officer, Morris, had already raised his hands, his face pale. Foster turned to Evelyn. "Do you want to press additional charges, Judge Banks?" Evelyn smiled at the mention of her title. "Oh, don't worry. This is just the beginning. I have enough evidence to make sure everyone involved faces consequences." Daniel spat on the floor. "You think you won?" Evelyn stepped closer, her voice calm. "No, Sergeant. I know I did." As the officers were led away in handcuffs, the weight of the moment settled over the room. The once arrogant men who had barged into Evelyn's home now shuffled toward the elevator, their heads lowered in shame. Nathan turned to Evelyn. That was satisfying. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Yes, but we're not done yet." Nathan nodded. "You're right. We still have to deal with the mastermind behind all of this." Evelyn picked up her phone and dialed a number. After a few seconds, a deep, familiar voice answered. "Madam Chief Justice," came the voice on the other end. "I was expecting your call." Evelyn's lips curled. "Good. Because we need to talk about who really ordered these evictions." Evelyn gripped her phone, her fingers tightening as the deep voice on the other end spoke with a practiced calmness. "Judge Banks," the voice said smoothly. "Or should I say, the woman who refuses to retire quietly?" Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. "You always had a flair for the dramatic, Leonard." Judge Leonard Whitaker, a man whose career had been built on burying people like her under mountains of red tape and legal loopholes. For years, he had disguised his racial biases behind the robe of justice, ensuring that black families lost their homes while wealthy developers grew their empires. And now he had been caught. Let's skip the pleasantries, she continued. The FBI already has enough on you to put you away for fraud, judicial misconduct, and conspiracy. So tell me, Leonard, who's really pulling the strings? There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle. You always were sharp. But even you must know that I'm just a piece on the board. Then give me the king, Evelyn pressed. Whitaker exhaled. It goes higher than you think, Evelyn. The city council, certain real estate moguls, even people in the mayor's office. They wanted all of you out. Not just you. Every black property owner in high-value neighborhoods. Nathan, listening beside her, tensed. Redlining. Modern-day segregation. Evelyn's jaw tightened. I assume they rewarded you well for your cooperation? You know how the game works, Whitaker said with a smirk in his voice. We all have our roles to play. Evelyn's patience was wearing thin. Not anymore. Before Whitaker could respond, the line clicked. Nathan frowned. He hung up. Evelyn stared at the phone. No. Someone cut the line. Nathan's eyes narrowed. That means someone's watching us. Bang. A sudden crash shattered the tension. The front window of Evelyn's penthouse exploded inward as a black SUV sped away below. A rock, wrapped in a single piece of paper, skidded across the floor. Nathan grabbed it, unwrapping the note. His face darkened as he read aloud. Drop this case, or you won't live to see it through. Evelyn remained eerily calm. Well, that escalated quickly. Nathan's voice was tense. They're getting desperate. FBI agent Foster, who had remained in the hallway, rushed inside with his team. Are you both okay? Evelyn nodded. Physically, yes. Legally, she pointed at the note. They just made a very, very stupid mistake. Foster's face hardened. As he scanned the threat, I'll have the Bureau trace Whitaker's last call. If they cut the line, they left a footprint. He turned to his team. Secure the area. I want a full surveillance detail on Judge Banks. Nathan exhaled sharply. They wouldn't go this far unless we were close to something big. Evelyn walked over to the broken window, looking out at the city. Oh, we're not just close, Nathan. She turned, eyes blazing. We've already won. They just don't know it yet. Evelyn Banks sat in the back of a sleek black SUV, her face unreadable as the city blurred past. The FBI insisted on moving her to a secure location after the threat at her penthouse, but she refused to be intimidated. She had spent her entire life fighting men like Whitaker and the corrupt system that enabled them. Beside her, Nathan Carter scrolled through his phone, his face tense. Whitaker's call was traced to a secure line inside the mayor's office. Evelyn's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest. So we were right. This isn't just about real estate fraud. This is systemic. Nathan turned to her. The mayor won't let this case reach trial. If we don't act fast, they'll bury this before it ever sees a judge. Evelyn let out a small, knowing smile. Then we make sure it goes to trial before they can stop us. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread fast a case involving illegal evictions, judicial corruption, and possible citywide fraud had drawn attention from reporters, activists, and community leaders. Evelyn sat at the plaintiff's table, a quiet force of nature. Nathan stood beside her, flipping through legal documents. Across from them sat the city's legal team, high-priced attorneys hired to protect the establishment. At the center of their defense was Judge Leonard Whitaker, out on bail but clearly rattled. At exactly 9:05 a.m., the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and Judge Caroline Mercer entered. She was one of the few remaining judges Evelyn trusted, a no-nonsense woman known for her integrity. Mercer adjusted her glasses and glanced at the defense. We are here today to determine the validity of the evictions carried out under orders signed by Judge Leonard Whitaker. Counsel, you may begin. The city's lead attorney, a sharp-looking man named Roger Kessler, rose. Your Honor, My clients maintained that all actions taken were legal and within jurisdictional authority. Nathan scoffed, but remained silent. Kessler continued. Furthermore, any accusations of fraud are purely speculative at this stage. There is no concrete evidence that these evictions were racially motivated or that Judge Whitaker acted outside the law. Evelyn calmly stood. Permission to respond, Your Honor? Judge Mercer nodded. Proceed, Judge Banks. Evelyn approached the bench, her voice steady. Mr. Kessler would have you believe this case is about a simple eviction dispute. But what we have here is something far more insidious, a coordinated effort to displace black homeowners and tenants under false pretenses, benefiting a network of corrupt officials. She turned and gestured to the gallery. In the past 6 months, over 40 black families have been removed from high-value neighborhoods. Each eviction order was rushed through without proper hearings, and each of those orders was signed by one man. She pointed at Whitaker. The room fell silent. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but before he could react, Nathan stepped forward. Your Honor, the prosecution presents Exhibit A. He handed a thick file to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Mercer. The judge flipped through it, her brows knitting together. What am I looking at, Mr. Carter? Nathan's voice was sharp. Financial transactions. Each payment made to Judge Whitaker money funneled from real estate developers into accounts linked directly to his office. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Kessler cleared his throat, rising again. Objection. This so-called evidence has not been authenticated. Evelyn cut him off. Oh, it's very authentic, Mr. Kessler. She turned to the doors. Shall we ask someone who can verify it? The doors swung open, and in walked FBI agent Foster, followed by 2 federal accountants. Judge Mercer looked up. Agent Foster? Foster nodded. Your Honor, the Bureau has conducted a full forensic audit. We have confirmed that Judge Whitaker received over $2.5 million in illegal payments over the past 4 years in exchange for eviction rulings that disproportionately targeted black residents. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Whitaker's face turned red. This is outrageous. I demand a recess. Judge Mercer slammed her gavel. You will sit down, Judge Whitaker, or you'll be removed. The room fell into stunned silence. Kessler was already sweating, but he forced himself to remain composed. Your Honor, even if financial improprieties occurred, they do not prove racial intent. Evelyn smiled, turning toward the bailiff. Then let's present Exhibit B. The bailiff handed Judge Mercer another file. Evelyn continued. This document, recovered from Judge Whitaker's private email, outlines a plan initiated by the mayor's office to reduce black homeownership in key districts. Their reasoning? To revitalize the city's economic landscape. Judge Mercer flipped through the documents, her face darkening. Nathan stepped forward. These are internal messages exchanged between developers, city council members, and police precinct captains discussing how to legally purge black residents. Another wave of gasps. Kessler finally lost his composure. Your Honor, I object. This case, Judge Mercer slammed her gavel again. Enough, Mr. Kessler. She turned toward Whitaker. Judge Whitaker, given the overwhelming evidence presented today, I am ordering your immediate removal from the bench pending further investigation. Whitaker's mouth opened in protest, but no words came out. He had lost. Judge Mercer wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am freezing all eviction orders issued under your name and launching a full federal review into this city's housing policies. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but inside, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: satisfaction. Judge Mercer turned to the prosecution. Judge Banks, Mr. Carter, you have just uncovered something much larger than this courtroom. And rest assured, this is only the beginning. Evelyn nodded. Oh, Your Honor, we're just getting started. Evelyn Banks sat in the courthouse conference room, the tension in the air thick as smoke. Outside, Reporters clamored for statements, their voices a murmur behind the thick glass windows. The case had exploded overnight. The public now knew that Judge Whitaker had been selling eviction orders, and that the corruption extended all the way to City Hall. Nathan Carter paced beside her, phone in hand. "We just got confirmation. The mayor's office has called for an emergency meeting with the city council." Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. "They're going to try and contain this before it gets worse." Agent Foster leaned forward from across the table. "We intercepted a few messages from inside City Hall. Mayor John Calloway is planning something. He's not just going to sit back and let this case take him down." Nathan clenched his jaw. "What's his play?" Foster sighed. "We don't know yet. But we do know that the city's legal department is moving to dismiss the case before it can go to trial." Evelyn finally looked up, her sharp gaze settling on Foster. "They can't dismiss it. Not after what we've presented in court." "They can try," Nathan muttered. "And if they succeed, Whitaker walks free, and the city council sweeps everything under the rug." Evelyn exhaled. "Then we don't give them the chance." The council chamber was packed. Elected officials lined the semicircle, the mayor seated at the center like a king on his throne. Mayor John Calloway, an older white man with a sharp suit and a sharper tongue, scanned the room with cold calculation. He was a man used to controlling the board. Evelyn and Nathan sat in the front row of spectators, watching as the mayor leaned into his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, in light of recent allegations against former Judge Leonard Whitaker, the city has deemed it necessary to reassess the legal proceedings surrounding this case." He paused, his voice carrying authority. "We must act responsibly and ensure that our justice system is not being weaponized for political gain." Nathan scoffed under his breath. "Here we go." The mayor continued. "Therefore, I am introducing a motion to dismiss the case against the city, citing a lack of evidence linking this office to any wrongdoing. Furthermore, we will be issuing a full audit of past eviction rulings to confirm their validity." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dismiss the case? The mayor was trying to delay and deflect, knowing that an audit would take months, long enough for the public outrage to die down. Evelyn stood. "Your Honor," she said firmly. The mayor barely glanced at her. "Judge Banks, this is a council proceeding. Spectators do not have the floor." Evelyn's voice didn't waver. "Neither do criminals. But that hasn't stopped you from speaking, has it?" The room went silent. The mayor's eyes darkened. "Judge Banks, if you cannot respect the proceedings—" "Oh, I respect the proceedings," she interrupted, stepping forward. "I just don't respect liars." Nathan hid a smirk as Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "You claim there is no evidence linking this office to wrongdoing?" Evelyn held up a document. "Then explain why $500,000 was wired from a real estate developer's account to your campaign fund 2 days before the first illegal eviction order was signed." The mayor stiffened. Evelyn didn't stop. "Explain why your chief of staff received personal checks from the same developers who bought up the properties seized by Whitaker." Gasps filled the room. Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. Nathan leaned forward. "Your Honor, we formally request that Mayor Calloway be placed under federal investigation for corruption and obstruction of justice." A council member, a middle-aged Latina woman, suddenly spoke up. "Madam Chair, I second that request." A second voice followed. "Third." The mayor's face turned red. He slammed a hand on the table. "This is ridiculous." Evelyn took another step forward. "Is it? Because I also have transcripts of private meetings, conversations between your office and police precincts, discussing strategies to clear out high-value neighborhoods by any means necessary." The mayor's mouth opened, then closed. He was trapped. Evelyn delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, I formally request that the City Council move to suspend Mayor Calloway from office, pending a full federal investigation." The chamber exploded. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. and council members whispered urgently among themselves. The mayor looked around, realizing for the first time in his career he had lost control. Nathan glanced at Evelyn. Checkmate. A tense 15 minutes passed as the council deliberated. Then, the council chairwoman called for a vote. All in favor of suspending Mayor Calloway and launching a federal probe? One by one, hands rose. 1, 2, 5, 10. When the final hand lifted, the count was 14-3. The chairwoman turned to Calloway. By a majority vote, Mayor Calloway, you are hereby suspended from office, effective immediately. A deafening silence filled the chamber. The mayor's face twisted in fury. You think this is over? He growled at Evelyn. She met his gaze unshaken. No, John. She smiled. This is just the beginning. The moment the gavel struck, solidifying Mayor John Calloway's suspension, chaos erupted in the council chamber. Reporters flooded the floor, cameras flashing like a violent thunderstorm. Calloway, still seated at the center, looked utterly stunned, his face locked in a mixture of disbelief and rage. He had never imagined this day would come. Evelyn Banks watched the scene unfold with a measured calm. She had fought battles in the courtroom for decades, but this was different. This wasn't just about one corrupt judge or a few bad cops. This was about dismantling a system that had been rigged against people like her for generations. Beside her, Nathan Carter scrolled through his phone. The governor just released a statement, he murmured. He's calling for a full-scale investigation into the mayor's office. Evelyn smirked. Smart move. He doesn't want to go down with Calloway. Agent Foster stepped forward, nodding toward the council members who were still processing what had just happened. Judge Banks, we need to move quickly. The mayor still has powerful allies, and I guarantee they're already planning their next move. Evelyn nodded. Then let's make sure we're ahead of them. Across the room, Calloway finally stood. He adjusted his tie, trying to regain a semblance of control. You're all making a mistake, he barked, voice laced with barely concealed panic. I've dedicated my life to this city. You want to throw me under the bus because of a few bad investments? Evelyn turned to face him, arms crossed. Bad investments? She let out a sharp laugh. Is that what you call orchestrating illegal evictions, accepting bribes, and using law enforcement as your personal gang? Calloway sneered. You think you're a hero, don't you? Evelyn took a step forward, lowering her voice. I don't need to be a hero, John. I just need to make sure you burn for what you've done. The mayor's jaw clenched. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out. Nathan exhaled. That's a man who knows he's losing. Evelyn's eyes darkened. No, that's a man who's about to get desperate. Hours later, Evelyn, Nathan, and Agent Foster sat in a secured FBI office, reviewing the evidence against Calloway. The case was strong, but something still felt unfinished. There's one thing we're missing, Nathan said, pacing. Calloway was working with Whitaker, the police, and developers, but someone had to be at the top of it. Oh, someone who made sure the money flowed, who controlled the timing of these evictions. Foster rubbed his temples. If we don't find that person, Calloway could cut a deal. He might take a reduced sentence in exchange for handing over someone even bigger. Evelyn drummed her fingers against the table. Then, slowly, she spoke. Have we checked Calloway's personal records? Nathan frowned. His campaign finances, his emails? No, Evelyn interrupted. I mean his private investments, his real estate holdings. Foster's eyes widened. You think he bought some of these properties himself? Evelyn nodded. Men like Calloway don't just take bribes. They invest. Foster stood. I'll get a warrant. By nightfall, the FBI had what they needed. Calloway hadn't just been orchestrating the evictions, he had been personally buying up the properties through shell companies, flipping them for millions. Nathan read the report, shaking his head. This isn't just fraud. This is racketeering. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, exhaling. We have him. Foster nodded. And this? This guarantees he's going to prison. The next morning, the world watched as former Mayor John Callaway was led out of his estate in handcuffs. Flanked by federal agents, his once proud figure now looked small, powerless. Reporters shouted questions. Mayor Callaway, do you have anything to say? Do you deny the allegations? Evelyn and Nathan stood across the street, watching. He never saw it coming, Nathan murmured. Evelyn nodded. That's because men like him think they're untouchable. As Callaway was loaded into the FBI van, Evelyn allowed herself one moment of quiet satisfaction. Justice had finally arrived. But the real fight? It was just beginning. The world had barely begun to process the sight of Mayor John Callaway in handcuffs when Evelyn Banks knew something wasn't right. The arrest should have felt like a victory, but instead it felt like the calm before a storm. Nathan Carter sat beside her in the FBI's secured conference room, scanning through the newly unsealed documents. His brow furrowed as he flipped through financial records, property deeds, and wire transfers linked to Callaway's corruption. I don't get it, he muttered. We have everything: money trails, shell companies, fraudulent eviction notices, but something still doesn't add up. Evelyn sipped her coffee, her gaze locked onto the FBI's evidence board. That's because Callaway wasn't smart enough to pull this off alone. Agent Foster entered the room, shutting the door behind him. We just got access to Callaway's personal communications. You're going to want to see this. He tossed a printed email transcript onto the table. Evelyn picked it up, eyes narrowing as she read the exchange. Nathan read over her shoulder. Wait, Callaway wasn't just taking orders from the developers. He pointed at the email sender. The name on the screen sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. Senator William Bradford. Nathan let out a low whistle. Callaway wasn't the top of the pyramid. He was just a puppet. Senator William Bradford was a name everyone in the legal world knew. A seasoned politician, he had built his career on the promise of economic revitalization, but his policies had disproportionately displaced Black and low-income communities. He had never been caught in anything illegal until now. Evelyn clenched her jaw. I knew he was dangerous, but I didn't think we'd find a direct link. Foster nodded. Callaway and Whitaker were working for him. We traced millions in offshore accounts, all connected to Bradford's network of luxury real estate firms, the same ones that benefited from these evictions. Nathan frowned. But why would a U.S. senator get his hands dirty with local property deals? Evelyn exhaled sharply. Because these deals aren't just about money. They're about power. You push out an entire community, replace them with wealthy political donors, and suddenly you've reshaped an entire voting district. Foster's face darkened. Gentrification as a political strategy. Nathan shook his head in disbelief. They weren't just stealing homes. They were stealing democracy. Before they could move against Bradford, they needed one thing: Callaway's confession. By late afternoon, Evelyn and Nathan were escorted to an interrogation room inside the FBI's field office. On the other side of the table sat John Callaway, now just another disgraced politician in an orange jumpsuit. His arrogance had faded, replaced with exhaustion. He barely looked up as Evelyn took her seat across from him. Come to gloat, he muttered. Evelyn folded her hands. Come to make you a deal. Callaway let out a bitter laugh. I don't need a deal. Nathan leaned forward. Oh, you do? Because Bradford? He's about to throw you under the bus. The second this scandal gets too hot, you'll be nothing but collateral damage. Callaway's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Evelyn tilted her head. Tell me, John, how many times have you taken the fall for someone more powerful? Callaway flinched. Bingo. Evelyn continued, voice like steel. You were useful to Bradford as long as you kept your mouth shut. But now, you're a liability. And men like him don't protect liabilities. Callaway exhaled, rubbing his temples. Even if I talk, he won't go down. Bradford is untouchable. Nathan smirked. See? That's the funny thing about power. It only works when people are too scared to fight back. Evelyn slid a blank cooperation agreement across the table. Sign this. Testify against Bradford. And instead of spending the rest of your life rotting in prison, you might get out before you're an old man. Calloway stared at the document. For the first time, he looked afraid. Finally, he reached for the pen and signed. By nightfall, Senator William Bradford was the top headline in every news outlet. Disgraced Mayor Calloway cooperates with FBI, names U.S. Senator in housing corruption scandal. Federal investigation launched into real estate conspiracy could reach Washington, D.C. Powerful people are going to fall, says Judge Evelyn Banks. Evelyn stood in front of the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed as she faced the questions head-on. Judge Banks, do you believe Senator Bradford will face charges? Evelyn smiled, calm and unwavering. I don't believe I know. She turned and walked away, leaving the city buzzing with the realization that for the first time, the people who thought they were untouchable were finally being dragged into the light. And it was only a matter of time before the empire they built came crashing down. The news of Senator William Bradford's alleged involvement in the housing corruption scandal hit the country like a shockwave. His name, once synonymous with power and influence, was now embroiled in one of the biggest federal investigations in decades. Bradford, however, was no fool. He had weathered scandals before, and unlike Calloway, he still had friends in high places. Inside his private estate, nestled in the wealthiest district of the city, Bradford sat in his expansive office, watching the news unfold. His grip tightened around his whiskey glass as he listened to reporters dissecting his downfall. Federal prosecutors are now reviewing the evidence linking Senator William Bradford to a massive real estate fraud scheme. Sources say the former mayor of the city, John Calloway, has provided crucial testimony connecting Bradford to illegal evictions and financial kickbacks. Bradford exhaled slowly. Calloway was supposed to keep his mouth shut. A voice cut through the tense silence. It's bad, William. Bradford turned toward his attorney, Richard Vaughn, a man as slick as he was ruthless. Vaughn adjusted his tie, scrolling through his phone. The FBI has everything. Calloway's testimony is airtight, and Banks? She's got the courts eating out of her hand. Bradford's expression remained cold. And what are we doing about it? Vaughn hesitated. We're working on it, but the usual tricks won't work this time. They have the financial records, wire transfers, internal memos. You're looking at conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. That's a life sentence, if they convict. Bradford slammed his glass onto the table. I am a United States Senator. I don't get convicted. Vaughn didn't flinch. That may have been true before, but now, you're a liability. Bradford's jaw tightened. Your donors are distancing themselves, Vaughn continued. Your political allies are staying quiet. The party's already drafting a statement to condemn you. They're treating you like a king who's already lost his throne. For the first time, real panic flickered in Bradford's eyes. The people who had once protected him were abandoning ship. Evelyn Banks sat across from federal prosecutors in a secured conference room, reviewing the final legal strategy to take Bradford down. Nathan Carter stood beside her, flipping through files. So, Nathan said, how long until we officially charge him? A lead prosecutor, Victoria Lee, leaned forward. We already have enough to indict, but we want to squeeze him first. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Squeeze him how? Lee smirked. We make sure he knows he has nowhere to run. Nathan nodded. That means freezing his assets, revoking his political endorsements, isolating him from any legal defense that could drag this out for years. Evelyn exhaled. You want to break him before we even step into the courtroom? Lee nodded. Exactly. We make the king feel powerless. By morning, the full force of the federal government was moving against Bradford. His bank accounts were frozen. His political donations were seized. His private jet was grounded. The empire he had built brick by brick was collapsing in real time. Vaughn burst into Bradford's office, his face pale. They just filed the federal indictment. Bradford straightened. What charges? Vaughn swallowed hard. 23 counts, including conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery, and racketeering. Bradford let out a slow, controlled breath. How long before they arrest me? Vaughn hesitated. I'd say less than 24 hours. For the first time in his career, Bradford felt something unfamiliar fear. He ran a hand down his face. Then we need to make sure Banks never sees the inside of a courtroom. Vaughn frowned. What are you saying? Bradford's voice was eerily calm. I'm saying we take the fight to her. That night, Evelyn and Nathan were going over trial strategies when a knock came at the door. Agent Foster entered, his face unreadable. We have a problem. Evelyn set her papers down. What kind of problem? Foster handed her a tablet. On the screen was a video. Evelyn pressed play. The grainy footage showed her car, parked outside her home, engulfed in flames. Her stomach clenched. Nathan cursed under his breath. When did this happen? An hour ago, Foster said. No casualties, but the message is clear. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She had faced intimidation before, but this was different. This is Bradford, Nathan said. He's getting desperate. Foster nodded. We have extra security on you, but I won't lie, he's still dangerous. Evelyn stared at the video again. The flames reflected in her eyes, but when she spoke, her voice was ice. He thinks he can scare me. Nathan placed a hand on her shoulder. So what do we do? Evelyn met his gaze. We don't back down. The air outside the federal courthouse was electric. News vans lined the streets, their cameras aimed at the steps leading to the grand entrance. Protesters gathered on both sides, some demanding justice, others claiming the charges against Senator William Bradford were politically motivated. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The trial hadn't even begun, and already it was being called the trial of the century. Evelyn Banks sat at the prosecution's table, her expression unreadable as she sifted through her notes. This was it. Everything they had fought for led to this moment. Nathan Carter leaned over. You ready? Evelyn didn't look up. I've been ready for this fight my whole life. At exactly 9 a.m., the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and in walked William Bradford. He looked different. The once confident, untouchable senator had been reduced to a man who knew his time was running out. His tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his posture, the slight tremor in his fingers as he adjusted his tie. As he passed Evelyn's table, their eyes met. There was no smug arrogance in his gaze this time, just cold calculation. He was still dangerous. He took his seat at the defense table beside his high-powered attorneys. These were some of the best legal minds money could buy. But even they couldn't rewrite the truth. Judge Caroline Mercer entered, her presence commanding immediate silence. The courtroom stood as she took her place at the bench. She cleared her throat. This court is now in session for the United States versus Senator William Bradford. And just like that, history began. The lead prosecutor, Victoria Lee, stood first. She approached the jury, her tone clear and authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about politics. It is about power, greed, and betrayal. She gestured toward Bradford. The man sitting before you abused his position to steal homes, destroy communities, and line his pockets with millions. He used the law not to serve the people, but to serve himself. She turned back to the jury. By the end of this trial, you will see that William Bradford is not above the law, and justice will finally be served. She took her seat. Then the defense attorney, Roger Kessler, stood. His voice was smooth, practiced. What the prosecution would have you believe is a conspiracy theory built on speculation and political ambition. He smiled at the jury. Senator Bradford has spent decades serving this country. And now, because of a few business deals, he is being painted as a criminal. His expression darkened. I urge you to look at the facts. Not the media frenzy. Not the emotions. Just the facts. He returned to his seat. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She knew their strategy. They were going to stall, misdirect, and try to turn this into a political circus. But she had the truth. And the truth was more powerful than any lie. The first witness was called former Mayor John Calloway. The courtroom shifted as he was led to the stand, now wearing an inmate's uniform. He had made a deal to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence, and today he was about to bring Bradford's empire crashing down. The prosecutor approached. Mr. Calloway, can you tell the court how this all began? Calloway took a deep breath. Bradford approached me years ago. He said he had a vision for the city, one that didn't include certain elements. The prosecutor nodded. By elements, you mean black and low-income residents? Calloway hesitated, then nodded. Yes. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The prosecutor pressed forward. How did Bradford instruct you to carry out these evictions? Calloway swallowed hard. We used forged documents, corrupt judges, and police pressure. We targeted black neighborhoods, pushing them out so developers could buy the land cheap and resell it for millions. He turned to Bradford, and he orchestrated all of it. The courtroom exploded. Judge Mercer banged her gavel. Order. Evelyn watched Bradford's reaction closely. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw locked. He knew this was bad. Kessler, Bradford's attorney, approached Calloway. Mr. Calloway, you cut a deal with the government for a lighter sentence, didn't you? Calloway nodded. Yes. Kessler smirked. So you have every reason to lie, don't you? Calloway's jaw tightened. No. I'm telling the truth. Kessler scoffed. How convenient. He turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a man trying to save himself. Ask yourselves, can you trust a criminal's word over a United States senator? He returned to his seat. Evelyn could tell some of the jurors were hesitating. Bradford's team was planting doubt. But she had one last move. Evelyn leaned toward Victoria Lee. Call the next witness. Lee nodded. The prosecution calls Nathan Carter. Bradford's eyes snapped toward them, alarm flashing across his face. Nathan took the stand, and the prosecutor approached. Mr. Carter, please tell the court what you discovered in Senator Bradford's financial records. Nathan cleared his throat. We traced $2.5 million from real estate firms directly into accounts controlled by Bradford. The prosecutor nodded. And do you have evidence to support this? Nathan held up a thick file. Yes. Bank statements, wire transfers, emails, all signed off by William Bradford himself. A collective gasp filled the room. Kessler shot to his feet. Objection. This evidence, Judge Mercer cut him off. Overruled. Evelyn watched as Bradford's face drained of color. This was it. The truth was now undeniable. Judge Mercer turned to Bradford's defense team. Do you wish to cross-examine? Kessler whispered furiously to Bradford. But the senator just sat there, staring. For the first time, he looked like a man who knew he had lost. Finally, Kessler sighed. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Mercer turned to Bradford. Senator, you have the right to testify in your own defense. Bradford didn't move. He knew he couldn't talk his way out of this. After a long silence, he finally spoke. I have nothing to say. The room erupted. Judge Mercer banged her gavel. Order in the court. Evelyn felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Satisfaction. They had him. And in this courtroom, justice had finally won. The entire country was waiting. Inside the packed courtroom, you could hear a pin drop. Reporters clutched their notebooks. The jury sat rigid in their seats, and every camera in the nation was pointed at the man who once thought himself untouchable, Senator William Bradford. For weeks, the trial had exposed the depth of his corruption, fraud, bribery, illegal evictions. and an elaborate scheme to reshape the city by forcefully removing black communities. Now, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury was ready. Evelyn Banks sat at the prosecution's table, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. This was the moment. Nathan Carter leaned in beside her. You think they saw through his defense? Evelyn didn't blink. They didn't just see through it, Nathan. They saw right through him. Bradford sat at the defense table, flanked by his legal team. But his lawyers weren't fighting anymore. Even they knew the truth was too overwhelming to twist. The judge's voice broke the silence. Jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged black woman, stood. She held the paper in her trembling hands. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Please read the verdict. The foreman took a deep breath, glanced at Bradford and began, in the case of the United States v. Senator William Bradford, on the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. A ripple went through the crowd, but the foreman wasn't finished. On the charge of bribery, guilty. Bradford's grip on the table tightened. On the charge of racketeering, guilty. The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Whispers turned into gasps. And in the front row, families who had lost everything to Bradford's scheme began to cry. Judge Caroline Mercer lifted her gavel, commanding silence. Order in the court. As the room settled, she turned to the jury. Thank you for your service. She then faced the defendant. Senator William Bradford, you have been found guilty on all charges. Given the scope of this case and the irreparable harm caused by your actions, the court sees no reason to delay sentencing. She leaned forward. This court sentences you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. A collective exhale filled the room. Bradford slumped in his chair. His empire, his wealth, his influence, all of it was gone. Kessler, Bradford's attorney, stood. Your Honor, we intend to appeal. Judge Mercer cut him off. Your client is a convicted felon. He will be taken into custody immediately. She turned to the bailiff. Remove him. 2 federal agents stepped forward. Bradford's face twisted in rage. You can't do this, he barked. I built this city. I made these people rich. Evelyn finally stood. No, Senator. Her voice was calm, measured, powerful. You didn't build this city. You stole it. Bradford turned his glare on her. You think this is over? He hissed. You think locking me away changes anything? Evelyn stepped closer. No, but it's a damn good start. The agents grabbed his arms. The once mighty senator was now just another criminal in handcuffs. And as they led him away, Evelyn Banks turned to face the people he had wronged. You did this, she told them. You fought back. And you won. Tears filled the eyes of those in the crowd. Mothers who had lost their homes. Fathers who had been forced out of their businesses. Grandparents who had been told they no longer belonged in their own neighborhoods. This victory belonged to them. The steps of the courthouse were swarmed with reporters. Microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Evelyn and Nathan emerged, side by side. Judge Banks, one reporter shouted. How do you feel about today's verdict? Evelyn paused. Then, with a small, knowing smile, she answered. I feel like justice finally caught up. Evelyn sat in her penthouse, looking out over the city she had fought so hard to protect. The skyline was the same, but something felt different. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Nathan entered, setting down a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. We should celebrate. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Since when do you drink during work hours? Nathan chuckled. Since we just took down one of the most powerful men in the country. Evelyn sighed, leaning back. It's not over, you know. Nathan nodded. I know. They both knew that corruption never truly disappeared. There would always be another battle, another fight, another injustice to face. But for now, for this moment, they had won. Evelyn raised her glass. To justice. Nathan clinked his against hers. To justice. And as the city buzzed outside, they sat in quiet triumph, knowing that for the first time in a long time, the right people were finally behind bars. Justice is not just about laws, it's about standing up when others try to silence you. Evelyn Banks fought against corruption, and today, she won. But in the real world, these battles happen every day. Who will be the next to stand up? If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful stories of justice, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Subscribe now, and let's keep exposing the truth together.